Sadness is a very interesting emotion. On one hand, it can be active, filled with protest, denial, and visible pain. Now, on the other hand, sadness can be a quiet, self-involved resignation. Sadness can be a very moving and powerful emotion to witness. However, used improperly in your scene or audition, sadness can slowly suck the life out of you and the viewer. I'm going to explain this a little bit more in a moment. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a look at the emotion of sadness. I'm going to be talking to you all about the emotion, as well as we're going to be looking at the triggers, the sensations, and the impulses. I'm also going to cover the family within the emotion, as well as some of the key words that might suggest a sad response. And then we're going to take a look at your take on this emotion. All right, so let's take a look at the muscle groups for sadness. Now, sadness involves the raising of the inner corners of the eyebrows. Usually the eyelids will droop. The lower lip will be protruding for most. The lip corners pull down. And one of the most recognizable signs of sadness is the triangulation that forms in the inner corners of the eyes. Also, when those lip corners pull down and sadness intensifies, you're going to often see a dimple on the chin. Now, you can get a better look at the inner corners lifting and the dimple on the chin in this photo here. It's a little bit more pronounced. Okay, so for the purpose of us all speaking the same emotional language, when all of the sadness muscle groups are activated and symmetrical, we're going to call that expression full sad. When we lift and pull down all of the muscle groups to the max, that's going to be the biggest recognizable reaction of sadness that you can get. Okay, here's what you need to know about sad. Sadness is not just about tears. Crying is only one aspect of sadness, and it may or may not happen. Going for tears without fully understanding sadness is the quickest way to jam you up or shut you down. So from an acting perspective, it's best to view sad as a two-sided emotion. One side is anguish, the other side is sadness. Both sadness and anguish are triggered by loss. However, the way in which they are expressed is very different. Anguish is active, as I said. When you experience anguish, tears may fall or you might cry out in pain. It's often accompanied by an illogical need to reclaim something that's been lost. Sadness, by comparison, is passive. Instead of protesting the loss as we do in anguish, we resign ourselves to the loss in sadness. Your first response might be shock, disbelief, or even anger, depending on you, the situation, and its importance to you. Sadness often follows anguish. For example, imagine for a moment a mother learning that her child was struck by a car and killed. Now, if the anguish she would experience would bring on the tears, the howling and pain, the denial. Now, after all the tears are spent and all the howling subsides, she's left with only loss. Sadness is silent grieving. However, while in the silent grieving state, if the pain of the event returns, she's on her way back to anguish. Now, what's interesting about sadness is that even when you are experiencing intense grief, you can find moments to reveal other emotions such as anger, joy, fear, or even disgust. Because of its passive nature, sadness is considered a black hole for an actor. It not only sucks the life out of you, but also everyone with whom you come in contact with. The only way to combat the passivity of sadness is to manage it with anger. It's the anger that keeps you moving forward through the sadness. However, you must keep in mind, before you can work through the sadness, you have to create it. Managing the sadness is a more advanced class and something I teach in my emotion modifying class. And it's something that hopefully we're going to do at some later point. But for now, just keep the idea that you need something to fight against the sadness, which is anger, or you're going to succumb to it. All right, so let's take a look at the sad triggers. As I said already, any meaningful loss can trigger the emotion of sadness. The loss of a loved one, body part, job, reputation, relationship, or even the meaning of life, to name a few. We're going to explore other paths when we get into exploring your triggers, but for now, I want to impress upon you that if the loss isn't meaningful to you now, you're not going to trigger the emotion of sadness. Now, here's what happens. Often, actors will attempt to recall a loss from years ago. Although meaningful at the time, the loss no longer resonates the same way since circumstances have changed. For example, let's use a loss of a relationship that was incredibly meaningful to you at one time. You spent many nights crying over the breakup. However, now you're in a new, happier space, and the loss no longer has meaning. To dwell upon the loss that no longer has meaning can only lead to forcing the emotion or put you on the verge of hysteria, one or the other. Now let's take a look at the sensations for sadness. Intense sadness produces an overwhelming sense of heaviness in the body. You may also have difficulty swallowing. Now, if the sadness is experienced for a long duration, facial muscles may tend to droop, showing little to no expression. You still may see the heavy or the drooping eyelids. All right, now let's take a look at the impulses. With anguish, as I said, there's an illogical need to recoup the loss. You may do this through denial, protest, or refusal to accept the loss. With sadness, on the other hand, it's more about shutting down. You have no impulses. Again, there's that black hole. Energy levels drop, and you withdraw inside yourself. Okay, so let's look at the family and key words that might describe a sad experience. There are many words related to the sad experience, such as helpless, hopeless, depressed, dejected, devastated, or distraught, just to name a few. Let's take a moment to look at your take. Is sad your go-to emotional expression? Do you often feel helpless? Do you use the sad brow to punctuate your words? Do you enjoy having a good cry? Do you enjoy the sense of release crying brings? Is it easier for you to express sadness versus anger? Or are you the type to contain it? Many people enjoy a melancholy mood, however, many also don't. Perhaps you're the type that when sad feelings creep in, anger is your go-to emotion. You get angry when someone disappoints or rejects you. You have a hard time tolerating signs of weakness in yourself or others. For some, just the slightest sensation of sadness can invoke an anger response. If this is you, you're not alone. According to the research, most men and, of course, women have been taught since childhood to manage or distort the expression of sadness. In our culture, especially if you're a man, to express sadness in public is often perceived as a sign of weakness. Now, another reason for distorting your expression of sadness is how it makes you feel. Let's face it, very few people enjoy the suffering attached to sadness. What's your take? Understanding your relationship with sadness is key to seeing it in the material, hearing it in the directions, and executing it appropriately. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the emotion of sadness. What I suggest you do, take a moment to read the material I put up for you. Will really give you an in-depth look at the emotion. Keep this in mind. The more you're familiar with this emotion, the quicker you're going to see it in the material and hear it in the directions.